the widow's quiet life. The sun hung low over the dense forests surrounding the small settlement, casting long shadows across the weathered wooden homes scattered on the ridge. Among these homes stood a modest cabin, worn by time but sturdy, nestled between towering pines and a slow-moving stream. This was the home of Elisa, a widow whose days had been marked by quiet routine since the loss of her husband. Elisa's life had been one of hardship, yet she had learned to survive with resilience and a fierce independence. Her husband, a skilled woodsman, had fallen during a harsh winter, leaving her to manage the land and raise her young son alone. The village was a tight-knit but wary community, its people often glancing toward the wilderness with unease. Stories of roving bands and ruthless raiders kept many awake at night. Yet Eliza refused to abandon her home. Each morning, she rose before dawn to tend the small vegetable garden behind her cabin, gathering the fruits of the earth that would sustain her through the cold months. The mornings were her sanctuary, quiet moments filled with the song of birds and the gentle rustle of leaves. Her son, Thomas, played nearby, his laughter piercing the stillness like a melody of hope. Though the village held little beyond simple folk and hardy farmers, it had a fragile peace. Yet Eliza knew that this peace was fragile indeed, hanging by a thread woven from whispers of danger creeping ever closer. Traders spoke of lawless men prowling the roads, seeking easy prey and quick loot. The memories of raids on nearby settlements stirred unease, but many hoped the wilderness would shield them. On one such morning, as Eliza fetched water from the stream, her eyes caught a flicker of movement beyond the trees. Her heart quickened, a flicker of instinct warning her that something was not right. She returned home swiftly, gathering her few tools and preparing quietly. The safety of her son and home was paramount, even as she worked. Eliza's thoughts drifted to the stories her husband used to tell, a time when warriors and hunters roamed these lands, protecting the innocent from the shadows that sought to claim the vulnerable. Those days felt distant, like fading echoes from a forgotten past. Still, the fire of survival burned in her chest, ready to ignite at a moment's notice. The village bell rang out faintly in the distance, a signal that the day was moving on, but to Eliza, it sounded like a countdown. She secured the door and looked toward the horizon. The wind carried a distant murmur, almost like voices carried on the breeze. She gripped a worn hunting knife, a keepsake from her husband, feeling its comforting weight. That evening, as dusk crept over the land, the unease settled deeper into her bones. She sat by the hearth, Thomas asleep in a small cot nearby, and stared into the flickering flames. The world outside her window seemed to hold its breath. She prayed for strength for herself, for her son, and for whatever fate was coming to their door. Unknown to Eliza, beyond the thick woods, eyes watched from the shadows. A small band of men, hardened by years of survival on the fringes of society, had set their sights on her home. They were desperate, driven by hunger and greed, and saw the widow's cabin as an easy prize. Yet among them moved a figure apart, a Mohawk outcast, cast out by his own people and wandering the wilds alone. His name was Callan, a man marked by scars both seen and hidden. His path was about to cross with Eliza's, in a way that neither could yet imagine. The quiet life Eliza cherished was on the brink of shattering. But from that fracture, something unexpected would rise, a bond, forged in fire, a fight for survival, and a reckoning that would leave no one unchanged. The outcast's arrival. The forest breathed in silence as Callan moved through the shadows, a ghost among the trees. His footsteps were soundless on the mossy floor, and his sharp eyes scanned the underbrush for any sign of danger. The wind tugged at his long dark hair, tangled with beads and feathers, a stark contrast to the worn leathers he wore, remnants of a life both hardened and fractured. Once a respected member of the Mohawk tribe, Callan had become an outcast. The reasons for his exile were known to few and understood by fewer. Some whispered it was a betrayal, others a matter of pride or defiance. Whatever the cause, Callan had been forced to leave behind everything he knew, his people, his place in the world, and the identity that had defined him. Now, he wandered the edges of the wilderness and the fringes of settlement, neither fully accepted by the villagers nor welcome among his own. His skills as a hunter and warrior were unmatched, yet his solitude was both his shield and his prison. Trust was a fragile thing he could no longer afford. For months, Callan had tracked the movements of a dangerous band, a group of desperate men turned marauders, preying on the weak and the vulnerable. His sharp eyes caught their campfires flickering like bad omens against the night, their cruel laughter carried on the wind. These men threatened not only the scattered homesteads but the fragile peace that the region struggled to maintain. One evening, while scouting near the outskirts of a small village, Kaylin heard tales of a widow living alone with her young son. The villagers spoke of her bravery, of her determination to hold on to her land despite the growing threats. The image of the widow stirred something long dormant in Kalana, spark of something beyond mere survival. He had no intention of interfering in human affairs, but the injustice of a lone woman being left defenseless by a world grown harsh and cruel touched him. Against his better judgment, he found himself drawn toward her cabin, a place nestled between the trees where hope still flickered. As he approached the clearing where her home stood, Kaylin moved cautiously, blending with the shadows as if part of the forest itself. He observed, from a distance, the widow tending her garden, her son playing with a wooden toy carved crudely but lovingly. The scene was simple, yet it held a quiet dignity. Kellen's mind wandered to the past, to the faces of those he had lost. The battles fought, the harsh lessons learned. He felt the weight of exile in every breath, a reminder that he was a man apart, a shadow lingering between worlds. But in Eliza's determined stance, in the protective way she shielded her child, he saw a reflection of his own struggle. She fought to survive in a world that seemed bent on crushing those who dared to stand alone. Perhaps, he thought, fate had led him here for a reason. Night began to fall. The sky painted in hues of deep purple and soft gold. Kaylin slipped closer, moving with the silent grace of a predator, his senses sharp and alert. He spotted the tracks of the marauder's heavy boots crushed into the soft earth. Careless and bold, the realization struck hard. The danger was near, closer than anyone knew. Kellen's mind raced with possibilities. Should he warn the widow? Should he stay hidden and watch? The answer came swiftly. This time, he would not turn away. He stepped from the shadows, his presence sudden but calm. Eliza looked up, startled, clutching a small knife to her chest, as if it alone could shield her. Her eyes widened at the sight of the stranger man, unlike any she had seen before. With the proud bearing of a warrior and the hardened gaze of one who had survived countless storms. "I mean no harm," Kaylin said quietly, his voice steady, but edged with the weariness of a man who had spoken too little in years. "I have seen the men who come this way. They will bring death to this place if they find it unguarded." Eliza studied him, suspicion mingling with a flicker of hope. "Why help me? Why risk your life for a stranger?" Kellen's jaw tightened. "Because sometimes, the world chooses us to stand when others fall. And because I am tired of running." In that moment, a fragile alliance was formed to souls bound by loss, courage, and the will to fight back against the darkness creeping closer. The night deepened around them, the quiet before the storm. Together, they would face what was coming. Neither fully trusted the other yet. But necessity forged a connection stronger than words. Kaylin looked toward the trees, where shadows shifted and footsteps approached. The raiders were coming. And he was ready. The threat looms. The air was thick with tension as dusk settled over the woods surrounding Eliza's cabin. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, seemed amplified in the stillness. Inside the small home, the widow and the outcast moved, with quiet purpose, preparing for the storm they both knew was coming. Eliza worked swiftly, gathering what she could, sharpened tools, a few provisions, and the old rifle her husband had left behind. Dusty but serviceable, it had become a symbol of her will to survive. She handed it to Kaylin with a steady hand. "I don't know how to use this," she admitted, her voice steady but tinged with worry. "You'll learn," Kaylin said, inspecting the rifle with the practiced eye of a man who had spent his life among weapons. "Stay close, and don't hesitate." Outside, the first signs of the raiders' approach appeared. Shadows lengthened along the forest edge, figures moving with purpose. Their low voices carried faintly on the wind. The band was larger than Kaylin expected, men, hardened by hunger and desperation. Faces twisted with greed. Kellen's mind raced through possibilities. The raiders would expect an easy target, a widow and a child with no means of defense. They did not anticipate the presence of a warrior who had once walked proud among his people. Together, Kaylin and Eliza set traps, simple but effective snares made from twisted vines and sharpened stakes hidden beneath leaves and branches. Kaylin showed Eliza how to use the terrain, turning the forest into a maze that favored the defender. Each trap was a promise of pain for anyone foolish enough to cross it. Despite their preparations, Eliza's fear was palpable. She had faced loneliness, grief, and the harshness of the land, but never violence of this kind. She looked at Kaylin, and saw not just a protector, but a man burdened by his own ghosts. She wondered what had driven him to the edge of the world. "Why do you fight?" she asked quietly as they worked side by side. Kaylin paused, gaze fixed on the darkening trees. "Because I have nothing left to lose. And because sometimes, standing still is the same as dying." Night fully embraced the cabin, wrapping the world in shadows. The raiders closed in, their rough voices now louder, punctuated by curses and the clink of weapons. They moved with the confidence of predators certain of their prey. Eliza clutched her son close as the first distant shouts echoed through the woods. Her heart pounded like a drum, fear and determination battling within her. Kaylin crouched by the door, watching the dark shapes approach. His breath was steady, eyes sharp, every muscle ready to spring into action. He thought of the life he had lost, of the tribe that had cast him out, and of the woman and child who now depended on him. The raiders reached the edge of the clearing. One of them stepped forward, shouting a demand for supplies and shelter. Their leader, a cruel man with a scar running down his cheek, barked orders, expecting no resistance, but resistance was exactly what they would find. Kaylin rose from the shadows like a spirit of the forest, his voice low and commanding. "This place is not yours." Surprise flickered across the faces of the raiders. They had anticipated an easy victory, not a ghost from the wild standing in their way. A tense silence fell, broken by the sudden snap of a trap as a man fell into the hidden pit, his screams piercing the night. Chaos erupted. The raiders charged, weapons drawn. But Kaylin was ready. He moved with the precision and fury of a man who had long ago learned to survive on his own terms. Each strike was calculated, each movement a dance of death. Eliza watched, both terrified and awestruck, as the outcast turned the forest itself into a weapon. Yet the battle was far from over. The raiders regrouped, snarling curses and firing arrows into the trees. The fight would test every ounce of strength and courage they possessed. Eliza took a deep breath, gripping her knife as she stepped beside Kaylin. "We're not just fighting for survival," she said, voice steady despite the storm raging outside. "We're fighting for something worth protecting." Kaylin nodded, eyes blazing with a fierce light. "Then we fight as one." The night stretched long and dark, filled with the sounds of battle, of men and shadows locked in deadly conflict. The outcome was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the widow and the outcast would not go quietly into the night. The first clash rewritten night had fully fallen, draping the forest in a velvet darkness punctuated only by the cold light of the moon. The quiet was shattered by the crunch of heavy boots pressing into the undergrowth, voices low and tense. The raiders had come, driven by desperation and the hunger for easy spoils. Inside the small cabin, Eliza's hands trembled as she gripped her knife, her breath steadying despite the pounding in her chest. She glanced at Kaylin, whose eyes burned with a fierce intensity, a predator ready to strike. Though a stranger to her, he was now the wall between her family and ruin. Without warning, the first raider emerged from the shadows, a crude club raised high. Kaylin met him before he could reach the cabin's door, moving with a speed that belied his large frame. A sharp grunt and the man collapsed, clutching his side as Kaylin pressed forward. Eliza barely had time to react when another figure lunged toward her. Instinct took over. She ducked and slashed with the knife, the blade catching a rough sleeve. The raider stumbled back, shocked by her defiance. Outside, the forest became a battleground. Kaylin used the trees for cover, disappearing and reappearing. Like a phantom, his knowledge of the terrain was his greatest weapon. He led the attackers into tight spots where their numbers counted for little. The raiders soon realized this was no simple raid. Eliza's courage, born from years of hardship, surprised them. She was no helpless woman. She fought tooth and nail to protect her son and home. Amid the chaos, Kellen's mind was sharp, watching for openings and weaknesses. He spotted the leader barking orders from behind the lines, rallying his men with fierce determination. Taking a deep breath, Kaylin moved silently toward the man, aiming to disrupt their command. Suddenly, a yell rang out, a warning that the leader had seen him. Arrows whistled through the trees as the battle intensified. Kaylin barely dodged a volley, rolling behind a thick oak for cover. Back at the cabin, Eliza heard the sharp cry of her son. She turned just in time to see a raider reaching for Thomas, his face twisted with cruel intent. Without hesitation, Eliza lunged, knocking the man away and shielding her son. Kaylin, hearing the commotion, rushed back just as another attacker charged at Eliza. The two met in a brutal clash, fists and blades meeting, raw strength pitted against skill. Kellen's anger fueled his strikes, but he fought with precision. mindful of the boy's safety. The skirmish stretched on, neither side willing to yield, but gradually the tide turned. The raiders' frustration grew as their plans unraveled, their formations breaking under relentless pressure. One by one, men fell or fled into the dark woods, their once bold voices now filled with fear and curses. The forest reclaimed its silence, broken only by heavy breathing and the distant hoot of an owl. Eliza wiped sweat and grime from her brow, glancing at Kaylin, who stood tall despite bruises and scratches. "We did it," she whispered, voice trembling. Kaylin nodded, but his eyes remained watchful. This was only the beginning. Others will come. Thomas, clutching his mother's hand, looked up at the outcast warrior with wide eyes. "Will you stay?" he asked softly. Kellen's expression softened just a little. "For now, you're not alone anymore." The first light of dawn touched the treetops, casting a hopeful glow over the battered cabin and its defenders. The night's battle was won, but the war for survival had just begun. Turning the tide, the dawn broke slowly over the battered cabin, painting the sky with soft hues of pink and gold. The quiet that settled over the forest was fragile, like the calm before another storm. But inside, something had shifted. Hope was no longer just a fragile dream but a tangible force that breathed life into weary hearts. Eliza moved with newfound purpose. The night's battle had tested her in ways she never imagined, and though her body ached, her spirit burned brighter than ever. She tended to her son's scraped knees and her own bruises, each touch a reminder of the price they had paid on, the cost they were still willing to bear. Kaylin stood nearby, sharpening his blade, eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of return. The outcast's past had been one of exile and solitude, but here, in this quiet clearing, he felt something he had long thought lost, a connection. Together, they began to repair the damage. The cabin walls, scarred by the raid, would be mended. The garden, trampled in the chaos, would be replanted, but more importantly, they began to forge a plan not just for defense, but for turning the tide against those who preyed on the weak. Kaylin shared his knowledge of the land, teaching Eliza how to read the forest like a map, how to move unseen, and how to listen to the whispers of the wind. His lessons went beyond survival, they were lessons in reclaiming power. "We cannot wait for them to come to us," Kaylin said one morning, voice low but fierce. "We must take the fight to them. Show them that this land is not theirs to take." Eliza nodded, a spark of fierce determination lighting her eyes. She was no longer the widow who had awaited rescue. She was a woman ready to fight for her home and her son's future. They set out together into the forest, tracking the raiders' movements. The band was larger than they had first thought, scattered across the region in small, ruthless groups. But where there was division, there was weakness. Using traps and the natural cover of the wilderness, Kaylin and Eliza struck quickly and disappeared before the raiders could respond. Each victory was a message, a warning that the settlers would no longer be easy prey. In the villages nearby, whispers spread of the fierce duo defending the land, a woman with a knife and a warrior with the heart of a lion. Slowly, others began to join their cause, those tired of living in fear. Eliza found herself standing among newfound allies, her voice strong as she spoke of resilience and resistance. The widow was becoming a leader, the outcast her fiercest protector, but with each step forward came greater risk. The raiders, furious and desperate, intensified their attacks. One night, as the moon hid behind clouds, a larger force descended upon the cabin, aiming to crush the defiance once and for all. The battle that followed was fierce and brutal, but this time, Eliza and Kaylin were ready. They fought not just for survival, but for a future they could believe in. As dawn broke once again, the raiders fled, broken and beaten. The forest held its breath, and in the quiet, Eliza and Kaylin knew the fight was far from over, but so long as they stood together, they could face whatever came. The price of defiance. The forest was eerily quiet the morning after the raid, as if holding its breath for what was to come. Eliza and Kaylin stood side by side amid the wreckage of their home, the weight of the previous night's battle settling heavily on their shoulders. Though victorious, the cost was clear. Deep gouges marred the cabin walls. The garden lay trampled, and the air was thick with the scent of smoke and sweat. Eliza wiped the grime from her face, eyes scanning the horizon, where dark clouds gathered like ominous warnings. She knew this would not be the last attack. If anything, the raiders would grow more desperate, more vicious. The threat was no longer distant. It had arrived at her doorstep, demanding a price for her defiance. Kaylin was silent for a long moment, his jaw clenched as he surveyed the damage. His mind, usually so sharp and focused, wrestled with the familiar pain of loss and exile. He was no stranger to sacrifice. But protecting Eliza and Thomas brought a new dimension to his loneliness. "We can't keep fighting like this," Eliza said quietly. "We need Eliza's others who are willing to stand, even when it costs everything." Kalen nodded, his gaze hardening. "There are those who still fear the raiders, who hide instead of fighting. We need to show them there is hope." That day, they set out deeper into the neighboring settlements, carrying with them stories of resistance and survival. Eliza spoke with villagers huddled around smoky fires, while Kalen shared his knowledge of the wilderness, teaching others how to defend themselves. Slowly, a fragile network of defiance began to take shape. But every step forward came with risks. Rumors of their growing influence reached the ears of the raider leader Yarek, who grew more ruthless with each passing day. He sent spies and assassins, hoping to silence the widow and her outcast protector before their movement could fully take root. One cold evening, as the sun dipped below the treetops, a desperate attack struck the outskirts of Eliza's cabin. Flames licked at the edges of the forest, and the cries of children echoed through the night. The attackers were ruthless, aiming not just to kill but to terrorize. Kalen and Eliza fought with everything they had. But the cost was devastating. Thomas was wounded, a shallow cut, but enough to remind them how fragile their victory was. The cabin was nearly lost to the flames before they managed to drive the attackers back. That night, as they tended to Thomas's wounds, the weight of their defiance settled heavily upon them. Eliza's voice trembled as she whispered, "Is it worth it? All of this pain, ... for what?" Kellen's hand found hers in the darkness, his voice steady and sure. "Every scar, every loss, it's worth it if it means we protect those who cannot protect themselves. If it means standing for something greater than fear." The price of defiance was steep, but it was the price of freedom. And as the first light of dawn filtered through the broken windows, Eliza and Kalen knew they would pay it again and again if necessary. For the fight was no longer just about survival, it was about hope, resilience, and the unbreakable will to live free. The final stand. The forest was alive with the whispers of coming storm, as dawn's light struggled through thick, heavy clouds. The air was charged with a restless energy, as if the earth itself knew what was about to unfold. Eliza stood at the edge of the clearing, Thomas clinging tightly to her side, while Kalen knelt nearby, checking his worn weapons one last time. They had prepared for this moment for weeks, fortifying the cabin, setting traps deeper in the woods, rallying the few brave souls who had answered their call. The villagers had grown in number, their fear slowly giving way to fierce determination. This was not just a fight for one widow's home anymore. It was a battle for the soul of the land itself. Yarek's forces were approaching, a band hardened by years of plunder, now desperate to crush the rebellion before it could spread. Their shadows stretched long across the earth, dark and menacing. Kellen's eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the shape of the enemy. "They're stronger than before," he murmured, "but we have the advantage of home and heart." Elisa nodded, her grip tightening on Thomas's hand. "We fight together for our future." As the raiders emerged from the tree line, the battle erupted like thunder. Arrows flew, traps snapped, and the forest echoed with the clash of steel and cries of defiance. Kalen moved like a force of nature, his every strike precise and lethal, cutting through the enemy ranks. Eliza fought beside him, her courage blazing as she defended her son and their hard-won home. The villagers, inspired by the widow and the outcast, stood firm, their fear replaced by a fierce unity. But the raiders fought with savage desperation. Yarek himself emerged, a dark figure leading the charge, his scarred face twisted with fury. He sought Kalen, recognizing the outcast as the heart of the resistance. Their clash was fierce and brutal, a storm of fists and blades, fury and will. Kalen fought not just for survival but for redemption, for the family he had found in Eliza and Thomas. The battle raged through the day, neither side willing to yield. But slowly, the tide turned. The raiders faltered beneath the relentless defense, their ranks breaking apart. When the dust finally settled, Yarek lay defeated, his power broken. The forest was silent once more. But this silence was different, filled with the promise of peace. Eliza looked around at the faces of those who had fought beside her, feeling a deep, unshakable pride. They had taken a stand not just against invaders, but against despair itself. Kalen approached, weary but unbowed. He knelt before Thomas, offering a rare, gentle smile. "Your home is safe now." Eliza stepped forward, placing a hand on Kalen's shoulder. "Thank you for everything." The Mohawk outcast looked out over the forest, the place that had been both his prison and his salvation. "This land will heal," he said quietly, "because we chose to fight for it." Together, they stood in the clearing, the widow, the outcast, and the child, symbols of resilience, courage, and hope. Their story was one of pain and loss, but also of strength and love. And as the sun set over the forest, it carried with it the promise that no darkness, no matter how fierce, could ever snuff out the light of those who refused to give up.